I don't know what my fascination is with like nuclear energy and nuclear bombs, but like, here we are. I'm Tribe Loui. We're gonna build a nuclear bomb today. Don't worry, we won't build it for any nefarious purposes, only for educational purposes. I just want to see what happens when you just detonate. I'm playing. I'm literally playing. Nuclear bombs are very, very bad. Very bad. You know what I'm saying? It's always good to have skills that you can call upon in your time of need. Who knows? Maybe one day I might need to, you feel me? Create a distraction. Bam. Nuclear bomb. Still playing. Nuclear bombs are bad. Very bad. They're not good, okay? Us figuring out how to create one is probably one of the biggest mistakes we've made. I ain't gonna lie to you. A lot of problems came from that. I'm sure a lot of scientific advancements and applications and breakthroughs came from us figuring out how to make something that can destroy half the planet in a second. However, I still think it's pretty bad. I ain't gonna lie to you. I still think we probably should have never learned how to do this. On God.
So, you want to build a nuke, eh?
Kind
well,
of.
for that, you'll need some uranium. Uranium is a radioactive element. It has many uses, including...
Alright, let's go get some uranium. Hold on. Nice. Alright, we secured the uranium. I just bought uranium off of Amazon.
curing cancer, generating power, and making people immediately stop fucking existing. Anyway, once you've mined some uranium, you'll need to enrich it. Why? Because isotopes. If you vary the neutrons in an element, you get different cosplay versions.
Oh shit, my fault. What? Isotopes?
Because isotopes. If you vary the neutrons in an element, you get different cosplay versions of that element. And the version we want here is uranium-235 because it's good in bombs and shit. So it's off to the centrifuges for some whizzy fun time, and soon you'll have shiny apocalypse cookies before you can say nuclear holocaust. And if you're still serious about building this thing, we'll need to talk about fission and fusion. Thanks to this smoking hot piece of physicist booty, we now know you can make a little bit of mass into a lot of energy. And one way of doing that is via fission. Fission is when you give big atomic nuclei a bonk and convert them into smaller nuclei, and you get loads of energy from that. It's how nuclear reactors work, and also bombs. Fusion is the reverse of that, basically, where nuclei combine. It's how the sun works, and also bombs. In a fission bomb, the goal is to get the uranium to release neutrons. One can do this via explosives, or claiming to have engaged in sexual intercourse with the uranium's mother. These neutrons will hit the unstable nuclei of the rest of the uranium, and at that point, well, whatever argument it was that led you to detonate this thing, let's just say you won that one. But if you're really pissed off, then you'll need a fusion bomb. This is a double whammy. The first stage is fission, then switches to fusion, creating essentially a star on Earth. Anyway, that's your nuke built, so it's off to the races, baby. Well, we'll need somewhere quiet to test it out. How's about somewhere near the Jornado del Muerto desert in New Mexico? Lovely little spot for a...
The what?
How's about somewhere near the Jornado del Muerto desert in New Mexico? Lovely little spot for a picnic. Make sure to bring some jam, those little triangular sandwiches, and a crippling certainty that thanks to you, humankind will forevermore be held hostage by itself. The first ever nuclear device is detonated on July 16th, 1945, codename Trinity. The device explodes with the equivalent power of 22,000 tons of TNT. Later, Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, will say, "I remember the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, 'Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.'" Just under a month later, the B-29 Enola Gay will drop the fission bomb Little Boy over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. It will explode with the power of 15,000 tons of TNT. Above will preside a mushroom cloud 60,000 feet high. Below, 70,000 people are immediately incinerated and mutilated by a shockwave travelling faster than the speed of sound. Thousands of people who are not killed in the initial blast will be exposed to ionizing radiation, suffering the effects for decades to come: hemorrhaging, cancer, and genetic mutations. 3 days later, a second bomb called Fat Man will be dropped on the seaport of Nagasaki.
This is what
At
I
least
mean,
60,000 people will be killed. Japan will surrender 3 weeks later, and the
60,000?
governments of the world will almost unanimously agree that this must never happen again. Not intentionally, not by accident, not by ignorance. In 1947, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists devised a doomsday clock with midnight representing absolute global catastrophe. Today, the clock stands at 100 seconds to midnight. Pretty bad, but frankly, it's hard to see what they're getting their little lab coats in a twist about, eh? World War II was ages ago. The threat of nuclear war is long gone. Other than, well, okay. In 1961, several 4 megaton nukes might have slightly fallen out of a B-52 over North Carolina, one of which narrowly avoided detonating because of a single safety switch. But okay, other than that,
What?
well, in 1962, a Soviet patrol submarine might have slightly lost contact with the land, the captain assuming World War III had already started and was about to fire a 10-kiloton nuke torpedo at a nearby US fleet before the flotilla commander could calm him down. And maybe 1967, when a solar flare took out a few NORAD radars, the US might have slightly freaked out and almost launched a bomber counterstrike against the Soviet Union. Then 1969, North Korea shot down a US radar surveillance plane. President Richard Nixon, allegedly drunk, gave the order for a nuclear strike in retaliation. Luckily, Henry Kissinger stepped in and we're still here. Or just the entire Cold War, basically 40 years of unrelenting nuclear panic. And then you remember the precarious state of mutually assured destruction, which is, well, when a mummy country and a daddy country hate each other very much, sometimes they get embroiled in a nuclear standoff. And one little deterrent against pushing the button is the knowledge that in the time it takes for your missiles to reach your enemy will have kindly fired theirs back at you. The idea is that if you're rational, neither of you are going to strike first.
Yeah.
Until you remember that humans are not rational, we are, I believe the anthropological term is, fucking morons. Currently, 9 countries have nukes. That's the US, Russia, France, my homeland of crumpets and self-hate, Pakistan, India, Israel, the uppity Korea, and of course China. And that's not to mention several countries probably have hypersonic nuclear missiles now, which can fly upwards of 5 times the speed of sound, rendering modern missile defense systems about as effective as putting up a little sign that says, "Oh, don't nuke us, mate. You said you wouldn't. What are you doing? You said you wouldn't. Why are you... Oh, for fuck's sake, you're such a dick." Or rather, if these puppies launch, in the words of the motto of the US Postal Service, "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night shall stay these couriers from swift completion of their appointed rounds." It's 100 seconds to midnight, baby. Nuclear Armageddon ain't gone anywhere. The Cold War ended in 91, but the real war, the silent war, has only just started because we discovered a 23rd century technology in the 20th century, and we're too primitive for this shit right now. And ironically, nukes are so prevalent in entertainment and media that we've almost forgotten this is real, that if we aren't constantly vigilant, apocalypse could happen anytime and it would be the end of everything, including possibly the only instance of life anywhere in the universe, all just because of some mental general or dickhead dictator. As Einstein allegedly said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones."
Damn. Damn.
Anyway, have a lovely week, won't you?
I don't want to make no nukes no more. Okay, so fission is atomic nuclei that's forcibly spread apart. And then fusion is them spread apart and then coming back together. So a fusion bomb is stronger than a fission bomb. How the Tsar bomb works. World's biggest nuclear bomb ever detonated. Learn from the base. Okay, the Tsar bomb.
1961. The Soviet Union dropped the most powerful nuclear bomb, equivalent to 58 megatons of
Jesus.
TNT. The resulting damage was more than 160 kilometers away. The flash from the blast could be seen from 1,000 kilometers away.
God.
This is the world's largest nuclear device ever created and tested. The Tsar Bomba, the Emperor of the Bombs.
The Emperor of the Bombs. Okay.
During World War II, the United States detonated 2 atomic bombs over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That marked the first use of nuclear weapons in war. Tens of thousands were killed in the initial explosions, and many more would later succumb to radiation poisoning. Since then, the world has recognized the terror and destruction of atomic weapons.
Hell yeah.
The bomb on Hiroshima, the little boy, released an energy equivalent of 15,000 tons of TNT.
That don't sound like no little boy,
Fat
bro.
Man, the Nagasaki bomb, released an energy equivalent of 21,000 tons of TNT.
Yeah, that sound like a fat man, I ain't gonna lie.
The Tsar Bomba was equivalent to 58 megatons of TNT.
God, what?
The Tsar Bomba was an aerial hydrogen bomb known as a thermonuclear weapon. The bomb was 8 meters long, had a diameter of nearly 2.6 meters, and a weight of more than 27 tons,
Jesus
the weight
Christ.
of 5 elephants. Inside
They
the
should have
weapon,
named that thing Fat Man.
a small atomic bomb is shaped like a sphere at the top of the casing. The top of the sphere contains conventional chemical explosives
What?
surrounding a sphere of the beryllium mirror casing,
What the
inside of which is a small plutonium sphere, about 4 to 6 inches in diameter.
Okay.
Below this atomic bomb is the hydrogen or fusion bomb. It consists of a cylinder made of uranium. The fuel for the fusion reaction, lithium deuteride. At the core of the cylinder sits a rode of plutonium.
So uranium, plutonium.
In between the fission and the fusion is an encasing made of styrofoam. This video is sponsored by Ground News.
What the
Ground News is the world's first news comparison website and app that lets you compare current events.
Bro. I don't care about no ground news, cuh.
Sources.
That you just threw off the whole video, my
link
guy.
A Tu-95 A Tu-95V bomber was modified to carry the weapon. It was so big it couldn't even fit in the internal fuselage of the enormous plane. The bomb was mounted on the outside of the aircraft. The plane was painted brightly white to lessen the impact.
Now imagine if that just fell, bro.
The plane was painted
Imagine they're
brightly
taking
white
off
to
and it
lessen the
just falls.
impact of the megabomb flash. The aircraft, piloted by Andrei Dernovtsev, took off from the Kola Peninsula. It was joined by an observer plane to measure the impact of the bomb. At approximately 11:32 a.m. Moscow time, Tsar Bomba was dropped over the Mityushika Bay test site on the deserted island of Novaya Zemlya. The bomb was equipped with a special parachute that would slow its fall, allowing the plane to fly a safe distance from the blast.
That's terrifying.
Barometric
You just see
sensors
that?
set the bomb to detonate 4 kilometers above the ground. The barometric sensor detects the final altitude.
Bro, what the
32 bridge wire detonators release an electric spark to detonate the chemical bomb.
Oh.
The chemical bomb detonation causes compression inside the plutonium and releases bursts of neutrons. One atom of plutonium is hit by a neutron, splits into 2, and releases energy, producing 2 or 3 additional neutrons.
Which splits into...
Each of these goes on to react or split other plutonium atoms, thus maintaining a chain reaction that produces a high level of heat, higher than even that at the center of our sun.
Seriously?
100 million degrees Celsius. The center of the sun is 15 million degrees Celsius. The temperature results in an atomic explosion.
Nigga, we created something
The
that's
fission
hotter than the
explosion
sun.
creates high-energy gamma rays and X-rays, which heat up the styrofoam and turns it into plasma. The heat and pressure of the plasma compress the fusion cylinder, causing the lithium deuteride to react. This compresses the fusion cylinder, causing the lithium deuteride to react and form helium and more neutrons.
Okay. But what does it do to the
neutrons
fission
cause the
part
uranium
of the
casing and
bomb?
plutonium rod to undergo more fission reactions.
Oh, this
causes more pressure on lithium deuteride. This produces more fusion, which releases more neutrons, which causes more fission.
What, bro? What?
Releases more neutrons, lithium deuteride. This produces more fusion, which releases more neutrons, which causes more fission.
Okay.
The positive feedback loop fission-fusion reaction goes back and forth until a huge explosion occurs, ripping everything apart. Amazingly, all these events happen in only 600 billionths of a second.
What?
That produced a mushroom cloud more than 60 kilometers high. The resulting damage was equally massive.
That island
And buildings
is done.
more than 160 kilometers away were reportedly damaged. In addition, it was estimated that heat from the blast would have caused third-degree burns up to 100 kilometers distant. Despite its incredible destructive power, the Tsar Bomba was never actually used in combat. It was designed as a warning to the West during the Cold War and served its purpose well. The Tsar Bomba showed everyone just how destructive nuclear weapons can be and served as a reminder of the devastation that could be caused if they were ever used in war. If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button and the bell so you're notified when I make.
I'm like fascinated by all this nuclear
Previously
energy.
gathered evidence indicated that on the night of the accident, the three-man crew was in the process of connecting the control blades to the drive mechanism when the excursion occurred.
The excursion in question was a steam explosion that occurred near Idaho Falls, Idaho on January 3rd, 1961.
Okay.
The SL-1, or Stationary Low Power Reactor Number 1, an experimental nuclear power reactor developed by the United States Army, had destroyed itself in milliseconds. Investigators said it was human error. The Army said it was the messy result of a sordid love triangle.
What?
Conspiracy theorists said it was a murder-suicide.
What?
There is still some controversy about what happened that night to this day, but what is absolutely clear is that the reactor's only 3 operators had died with no warning and no witnesses, and it was someone's fault.
Damn.
This is the true story of America's first nuclear meltdown.
Okay. Hey, that's a good little intro cut. I like that, Kyle Hill. Yo, Kyle Hill be lit. What?
The SL-1 reactor and the buildings that housed it were located at the National Reactor Testing Station,
I like that
approximately
dude.
40
He's
miles
cool.
west of Idaho Falls, Idaho.
Okay.
Part of the Army nuclear power program, SL-1 was designed and prototyped on-site from 1957 to 1958 and became operational that December. Its goal was to prove that miniaturized nuclear reactors were viable for Army operations, able to provide electrical and heating power to remote locations like the Arctic. But SL-1 was just one reactor in the US military's ambitious plan to harness nuclear power in all its forms. In the August of 1958, a US Navy reactor developed at the testing station became the beating heart of the world's first nuclear submarine, the USS Nautilus, which used the relatively inexhaustible energy source to dive underneath the North Pole, putting all of the world's militaries on high alert. At the other end of the sprawling
North
Idaho
Pole?
station, the US Air Force was rerouting hundreds of millions of dollars towards a nuclear-powered jet aircraft that could stay aloft more or less forever. The tiny SL-1 reactor, by contrast, the smallest in development, was not nearly as flashy and didn't get the attention or the funding that the promise of a nuclear jet or nuclear submarine commanded.
Yo, is nuclear
What it
energy
did
like
get
infinite
on the night
or
of
something?
January 3rd, 1961, was the maintenance efforts of 3 young men, Army specialists Richard McKinley and John Burns, and Navy electrician first class Richard Legg. None of them were above 30 years old. John Burns was just 22.
Damn.
Trouble was already brewing
22,
years
and
before
he's
the
working
accident.
on a nuclear...
John Burns and Richard Legg hated each other. They had gotten into drunken fistfights at prostitute-filled parties, and Legg had problems with authority. He had been caught sleeping in his car while on duty, he kicked his feet up on instrument panels, and he would set off alarms intentionally just to startle his crewmates. A month before the explosion, Legg showed up to work drunk. In the January of 1961, it was Richard McKinley's 3rd week on the job, and he was still learning the ropes, uncomfortable with all the readings and instruments. These were the men tasked with restarting a cold nuclear reactor containing 14 kilograms of uranium-235 on a frigid Idaho evening.
Why are they so underqualified,
Shut down
bro?
for
What
Christmas
the
and
hell?
New Year's, SL-1 was to be brought back to life by Burns, Legg, and McKinley on the 3rd day of 1961. The most important part of this process was lifting the central control rod manually just 4 inches to reconnect it to its drive mechanism. Burns, leg subordinate that night, prepared to lift the more than 80-pound rod with his bare hands, manually, just 4 inches to reconnect it to its drive mechanism.
Okay.
Burns, leg subordinate that night, prepared to lift the more than 80-pound rod with his bare hands while Legg stood with him at the top of the reactor.
80 pounds ain't
McKinley
too bad.
paced nearby. At 9:01 p.m., a reactor that was rated for 200 kilowatts of power generation spiked to 100,000 times that amount, 20 gigawatts, in just 4 milliseconds. The men didn't know it, but this minuscule moment, much faster than the blink of an eye, was the rest of their lives.
What?
Nuclear physics is hard, but how nuclear physics creates vast amounts of electricity is easy. Nuclear material naturally emits particles as it decays, which can impact other material and impart a tiny amount of energy as heat. If you put a bunch of nuclear material close together on purpose, as is the case in a nuclear reactor, radioactive decay will heat up other radioactive material, causing it to heat up and shoot out even more particles. Now we have a critical mass that will undergo a chain reaction all by itself. What stops this runaway reaction is other materials that get in the way, absorbing those particles. By moving these so-called control rods up and down in a nuclear reactor, you can precisely control how much heat is produced. Reactors then use this heat to turn water into...
Okay. This is a much better explanation of how a nuclear reactor works, bro.
Precisely control how much heat is produced.
I understand.
Reactors then use this heat to turn water into steam and steam into electricity. If anything were to go really wrong at a nuclear power plant, control rods would probably be involved.
Yeah.
The SL1 nuclear reactor used water in 2 ways: as something to turn into steam, and as a fluid to slow down the neutrons, the particles that start and continue nuclear chain reactions, flying out from the fuel rods. You see, not every neutron has the right energy to continue a chain reaction. Faster neutrons are actually worse than slower neutrons inside of a reactor, and so water's fluid can act as a so-called moderator to help continue the heat production by slowing down particles.
Okay.
What's more, the water in a reactor like SL1 can act like a failsafe. If too much heat is generated, water molecules move apart and expand into steam inside of the reactor. Now there are voids and less water to moderate, too many fast neutrons are flying around, and the number of fissions decrease drastically.
Okay.
The reactor gets cooler and safer on the path towards shutdown. In the interest of simplicity and reducing size, SL1 only had 5 control rods. As a comparison, the Chernobyl reactor number 4 had 211.
God damn.
Because of the small number of control rods and their orientation inside of SL1, the center control rod was immensely powerful. Moving it could drastically change the amount of radioactivity in the vessel. Shove the central rod number 9 all the way to the bottom of the reactor, and it would shut any reaction down. And pull it all the way up, and it could start up the reactor all by itself. Make no mistake, building a prototype reactor like this was inherently less safe than other larger reactors. Most of these larger reactors followed a design protocol that held that no single control rod should be this powerful, should be able to shut down or start up a reactor all by itself, as it would take just one stuck rod to create a deadly situation. As fate would have it, the control rods inside of SL1 had a habit of getting stuck.
What?
Between February of 1959 and December of 1960, the 5 control rods malfunctioned a total of 63 separate times. The central control rod had malfunctioned 7 times. In response, the Army told its operators to exercise the rods, regularly move them up and down to prevent them from sticking in the future. But the rods weren't the only problem. All the way up until 1961, corrosion inside SL1 was building up, bearings were wearing down, rods were getting misaligned. 15 days before the accident, 2 of the rods inside of SL1 had to be hit with pipe wrenches in order to work them loose. On the night of January 3rd, John Burns was leaning over a demonstrator.
I ain't gonna lie, you never want to start jerry-rigging a nuclear power plant, bro. What? That makes no sense. Why would they not have the funding to make sure that everything is well oiled up and lubricated, bro? It's literally nuclear energy. Isn't that deadly? What?
On the night of January 3rd, John Burns was leaning over a demonstrably unreliable control rod number 9, preparing to lift it just a few inches as a part of routine maintenance.
Demonstrably?
Richard Legg was watching over his shoulder. Richard McKinley was standing just a few feet away. At least, this was where their corpses suggested they were.
What? He just randomly drops they're dead statements. And I'm like, what? When did that happen?
The difference between a nuclear reactor and a nuclear bomb can be as simple as the speed of neutrons. When a large nucleus gets cleaved in two during a fission event, there are two kinds of neutrons that fly out. The first are so-called prompt neutrons, which are the particles that are launched outwards in less than 100 trillionth of a second. The second kind of neutrons are the delayed neutrons, which are produced by fission products a few fractions of a second later. Nuclear reactors take advantage of delayed neutrons in order to control the energy released. Nuclear weapons, on the other hand, want to produce as many prompt neutrons as possible, creating an avalanche of additional fissions that release energy as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
When a reaction like this kicks off, it's unsurprisingly called going prompt critical, and it's a condition that would be an absolute disaster inside of a sealed reactor.
I'm going prompt
Water and
critical.
nuclear material would instantly vaporize, circumventing the natural failsafe of a water-moderated vessel and create a situation closer to a nuclear bomb than to a source of electricity. At 7 p.m., John Burns got a phone call.
Wait.
It was his wife.
So if you can harness nuclear energy into electricity, that's like indefinite electricity, right? Technically, what they were doing, if they were successful, would have generated electricity to the most remote places. Why didn't they just use more control rods though? Like, why did they make that the middle one such? That makes okay. No, this is dumb, bro. I'm not gonna lie to you. This seems like a lack of like awareness towards the amount of power, and I don't know, to be honest, bro. I ain't no nuclear physicist, and I'm definitely not no military expert, but it seems like there should have been better people equipped to do this, bro. Are they even scientists, bro? Like, are they well versed in nuclear energy? One of the dudes was 22, bro. Okay, maybe I'm chatting.
Electricity. At 7 p.m., John Burns got a phone call. It was his wife, Arlene, calling the SL-1 facility to ask John for a divorce.
Damn.
According to Todd Tucker in his book on the subject, Atomic America, John and Arlene's last conversation ended with a discussion of how to split his paycheck. John would hang up the phone, exhausted, having slept on a friend's couch the last 2 nights.
Split the paycheck.
And because of his frequent headbutting with the powers that be at the National Reactor Testing Station, he was now personally and professionally stuck with the unglamorous, unloved SL-1 reactor. This was all going on simultaneously in the mind of a man who at 9 p.m. that night finally reached the point in his long list of duties that involved moving the central control rod of SL-1. With his supervisor, Legg, literally breathing down his neck and a soon-to-be over marriage surely clouding his mind, Burns hunched over the almost 100-pound rod, a rod that often got stuck, a rod that could start the reactor all by itself if handled improperly, and prepared to move it just 4 inches upward and no further. Operators of SL-1 knew what would happen if you lost focus and pulled the central control rod up too far. According to Susan M. Stacy in Proving the Principle, when asked whether or not the operators knew the reactor would go prompt critical if the central control rod were fully removed, one responded, quote, "Of course. We often talked about what we would do if we were at a radar station and the Russians came. We'd yank it out." End quote.
What?
In other words, improperly removing the central control rod would immediately kill everyone in the building.
Yeah.
Just 60 seconds later, at 9:01 p.m.,
Suicide
this
bomb
is exactly
by
what
nuclear
happened.
energy, bro.
As the report completed years later would conclude, Burns withdrew the central control rod many inches too far, and just 4 milliseconds later, a power surge of 10 million% above normal operation explosively vaporized the core of SL-1.
What?
Cooling water was blasted upwards by this vaporized fuel and struck the top of the vessel with an extreme amount of momentum, enough to lift the entire 26,000-pound apparatus over 9 feet into the air. The plugs at the top of the reactor were forced open by the over 500 pounds per square inch of pressure, and the control rods were fired, like missiles, at the ceiling. The entire reactor room was instantly filled with burning steam, contaminated water, and fragments of the radioactive core.
That quickly?
SL1 had just gone prompt critical. Later experiments would show that the explosion that night was the equivalent of 32 kilograms of TNT. And all that energy was released directly into the bodies of Legg, McKinley, and Burns. There was no one else in the building.
Yeah. I ain't gonna lie. That's crazy,
Long,
bro.
Long, short. This was the sequence of alarm bells that told the firefighters 8 miles away that something at the SL1 site was wrong. Heat sensors had been tripped above the reactor. But the 6-person team on the way wasn't particularly worried. They had already responded to not 1, but 2 false alarms at the site earlier that same day.
Okay.
So when they got to the building's unguarded gate at 9:10 p.m., they were expecting another non-incident. What they were not expecting was that the radiation detectors were blaring. 7 minutes later, at 9:17 p.m., a health physicist and a fireman donned masks and air tanks and approached the reactor building's stairs. Halfway up, the radiation detectors started ticking, and ticking fast. They retreated down the stairs for another detector. Theirs must have been broken, they thought. There was no way radiation levels inside were that high. They returned and found the same worrying readings, but this time they took a look into the reactor room. The operators were nowhere to be found. With enough radiation around them to be dangerously dosing them in minutes, the men again retreated. Emergency crews didn't enter the building for over an hour. The radiation levels were high enough that a plan had to be formulated first. So at 10:45 p.m., it was decided that only one entry into the building was allowed per person, and that entry was limited to just 60 seconds. When the first team of 5 men entered the building, they found 2 heavily mutilated men. Burns was dead. McKinley was moaning nearby. Both were soaking wet with irradiated water. Both were removed by stretcher and by the same ambulance. 15 minutes later, however, McKinley was dead. 2 of SL1's 3 operators were accounted for.
What about the
The
third?
third was discovered last because he was barely recognizable. Shaken men reported back at 11:38 p.m. after the latest pass through the destroyed site. They had seen something stuck to the ceiling, a lifeless clump they initially thought was a bundle of rags. It was the body of Richard Legg. Rod number 7 had been launched from the reactor vessel like a rocket and impaled him through his groin and shoulder to the top of the building.
What? Through the groin and shoulder?
Him through his groin and shoulder to the top of the building.
Damn.
While the body of John Burns and Richard McKinley were easily
Damn.
removed, the body of Richard Legg posed a problem. It was pinned by control rod 7 directly above the now obliterated reactor core. Emergency crews were worried that Legg's body might fall back into the reactor core during retrieval, and if it was covered in enough radioactive material, or if control rod 7 still had enough fuel in it, it might cause the reactor to go critical a second time.
It can.
So, while the bodies of Burns and McKinley were taken by ambulance to the nearby chemical processing plant,
do that?
a makeshift hot room for the corpses on the night of January 3rd, it would be almost a week before Legg's body would join theirs. On January 9th, a team of 10 men used sharp hooks on long poles to pull Legg's body free from the control rod piercing it. It dropped onto this stretcher, attached to a crane leaning in from outside the building. The explosion of SL1 remains the only fatal reactor accident in United States history.
Hey, the only one? That's
At the time of the accident, there was maybe
body
only a
snatcher.
single man on Earth who had performed an autopsy on a radioactive corpse. That man was Dr. Clarence Lushbaugh. Almost exactly 2 years before SL1 exploded, Dr. Lushbaugh had put a man named Cecil Kelly's brain in a mayonnaise jar and sent 8 pounds of his tissues around the country after Kelly died in a criticality accident at Los Alamos National Laboratory.
Why?
But that's a longer story for another time.
Why did he do that?
Dr. Lushbaugh boarded a military DC-3 in Los Alamos at 2:30 p.m. on January 8th, 1961, and arrived in Idaho 4 hours later. Reportedly, officials in Idaho were grateful for his availability.
Okay.
When Lushbaugh and his team arrived, they found 3 bodies waiting for them inside of the decontamination room of the Idaho Chemical Processing Plant, an improvised hot room after SL1 exploded. The remains of Burns and McKinley were in stainless steel tanks filled with alcohol and ice for preservation, and Legg was still in the lead cask he was placed inside after descending from the ceiling. His body was far too radioactive to be in the open air. To process these bodies, Dr. Lushbaugh's team would have to get creative. Each body was heavily mutilated and so radioactive that it wouldn't be safe to be in the same room with them.
So how did
According to the actual transcript of Lushbaugh's,
Jesus, there's a lot of reading.
since bodies emanating such high levels of radioactivity had never been encountered previously, modifications of the usual autopsy procedures and techniques had to be improvised upon the basis of radiologic safety procedures and common sense.
Yeah, I'm
The personnel
tracking.
who made these examinations comprised a well-trained team of 5 health physicists, 1 radiobiologist, 1 pathologist, and 2 physicians.
Why weren't they working on the SL1?
An improvised autopsy table was created from sawhorses and a stainless steel tray. Knives, hooks, and hacksaws were attached onto lengths of galvanized steel pipes by a nearby welding shop. The team wouldn't be able to get anywhere near the bodies with parts of them as radioactive as they were, so Lushbaugh cut them off.
Okay.
Quote, Legg's head, which appeared to be the major source of the prohibitive radiation level, had been damaged by the blast beyond recognition. There could be seen some obvious cervical fractures, which appeared to make feasible the separation of the head from the body. This operation was then carried out with a specially prepared knife, long-handled hook, and wire snare controlled through a 10-foot pipe handle. The remains of the head were placed in a lead cave 20 feet from the cask.
What the
End
hell?
quote. Again, according to the 1968 book Atomic America by Todd Tucker, large chunks of Burns, Legg, and McKinley were, quote, sliced, sawed, and hacked off by Lushbaugh, and then placed in a drum and buried in the Idaho desert as radioactive waste. End quote.
That's kind of crazy.
Rushed by radiation, each autopsy only took Lushbaugh between 15 and 20 minutes.
Graphic
Dr.
descriptions.
Lushbaugh determined the cause of death for each man. Richard McKinley bled out after his hand and the right side of his face was blown off during the explosion. John Burns, quote, died the instant he struck a flat surface that fractured his chest and drove a rib through his heart.
Damn.
And Richard Legg, quote, died instantaneously from the destruction of his viscera by rapidly expanding gases that penetrated his abdominal cavity along with a heavy missile. In examining the bodies, Lushbaugh was able to place the men the instant before SL1 went prompt critical. This answered the question of how, but not the question of why. Why did John Burns remove the rod like he did that night?
Yeah, that's
Was it an accident?
That's a very good
a
question.
suicide? Or something else?
Very good question, Kyle Hill.
Thankfully, most of the radiation released by the SL1 explosion was contained inside the
You're
building.
not going to answer the question?
This
bro?
allowed the General Electric Corporation to
how would
remove
he
the
know?
reactor
Yeah.
vessel and clean the contaminated buildings from 1961 to 1962. On May 21st, 1961, GE constructed a burial ground 1,600 feet northeast of the original site of the reactor and sealed 99,000 cubic feet of contaminated material underground.
Damn.
The bodies of McKinley, Burns, and Legg were not returned to their families. They were instead placed in lead-lined caskets inside of metal vaults and covered with concrete. Richard McKinley, John Burns, and Richard Legg had died during America's first nuclear meltdown on a frigid night in rural Idaho. There were no witnesses. Based on the circumstantial evidence, it was either an accident, suicide, or murder. It's not surprising that the story of an unstable John Burns just off the phone with his
Wait, why would it be murder though?
It's not surprising that the story of an unstable John Burns just off the phone with his now ex-wife who is possibly having an affair with Richard Legg committing a murder-suicide with a prototype nuclear reactor is the story that gets retold the most often. And you'd be hard-pressed to find any retelling of the story of SL1 that didn't include these details.
Yeah.
However, according to the final report, which took almost 2 years to complete and involved literally hundreds of scientists, experts, and engineers from a dozen different research and government entities, no evidence of a love triangle or murder-suicide was ever found. The best explanation, as mock-ups and experiments testing every aspect of that night demonstrated, was that the central control rod number 9 was likely stuck, as it had been stuck many times before, and Burns pulled the rod up too far while attempting to free it. This wasn't anywhere near as exciting as a jilted lover bent on nuclear revenge, but it was no less damning for the military. The SL-1 reactor was in a terrible state before it exploded.
Yeah.
It was literally falling apart and looked after by young men whose total experience could be measured in months. As Todd Tucker asks in Atomic America, quote, "Why would a reactor be designed so perilously close to criticality? Why would procedures actually dictate the manual lifting of that rod?
Nah, Todd
Why
Tucker
was
is
Burns
spitting.
allowed to perform dangerous maintenance with so little supervision?"
That's a bro. Todd Tucker? Yeah.
The direct cause of the accident clearly appears to have been manual withdrawal of the central...
Bro, that's really how fast it happened, bro?
Clearly appears to have been
And then
manual
boom.
withdrawal of the central control rod blade
You're dead.
by one or more of the crew members, considerably beyond the limits specified in maintenance procedure. However, there was insufficient evidence to establish the actual reason for such abnormal withdrawal.
The Army's hope for a miniaturized nuclear reactor had died with the men tasked with operating it.
Yeah.
Rather than revolutionize power generation in remote areas, the meltdown of SL-1 solidified a safety criterion for all future nuclear reactors built in the United States. No reactor after SL-1 would be constructed in a geometry that would allow for just one stuck rod to force it into criticality.
Yeah.
2 decades later, the world would experience the worst nuclear disaster in history. Chernobyl reactor number 4 would melt down and end up contaminating an area that was the size of countries.
Oh my god.
This meltdown was far worse than anything that ever happened in Idaho, but interestingly, it was also the result of improperly withdrawn control rods, also during the maintenance of a shutdown reactor,
these
and
control
also
rods,
overseen
bro.
by a small, unsupervised crew in the middle of the night. When we don't learn from history, it tends to repeat itself.
And that's a fact, Kyle.
Until next time.
Until next time, my man. Why do they have such inexperienced people working on this? Now, what if, well, there's no what if. This literally happened in Chernobyl. I was about to ask, what if this happened on a bigger scale? But it did. Chernobyl. What the hell, bro? Why do we insist on cutting corners? Like, what's up with that? Let's talk about what we learned today. I learned about fission, learned about fusion, I learned about the Tsar Bomb. I learned how the nuclear reactor works. That was very interesting to me. I'm beginning to see that the reactions that happen when nuclear energy is, like, I guess, used is almost infinite in nature. Like, it keeps on happening. You can harness that electricity-wise, and you have electricity forever. Why can't we do that? Like, is that an impossibility, or is it just too dangerous because we don't have the proper methods to actually harness nuclear energy safely and in a way that can be continuous? I'm just a young nuclear physicist, you feel me? It's just my first day out here, really, so I don't know much, but I probably know more than, RP them dudes, bro. I don't want to say I know more than them at this point because they're dead, you feel me? They were probably assigned to this post, didn't even want to do it. The military probably forced them to go to that post, bro. It's in the middle of nowhere. That sounds like a punishment post, I ain't gonna lie to you, but the thing is, you can't put inexperienced people even as a punishment at a place that wields nuclear energy, bro. You gotta pull them rods out, cuz it's getting hot. Nah, just pull it up a little inches and whatnot. Oh, it's stuck? Let me go get the wrench, bro. Clang, 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 I bet. You feel me? That's literally, like, bro, there is no reason why there's no reason why that should be a thing. You're hitting a control rod with a wrench. What I do know is that I've officially become a fledgling nuclear physicist. Welcome me. Thank you very much. I now know how to make a nuclear bomb. I ain't gonna lie, you don't know how to do. Well, if you watched the video and you paid attention, you're a nuclear physicist. God, welcome to the club. Yo, the tribe members have nuclear physicists now. I like that a lot. It's pretty fire. Imagine an actual nuclear physicist just gets offended. What? He knows nothing. What is he? Foolish child. Oh my god. Okay. enough of me. No, seriously, enough of me. I'ma leave y'all be. It's your boy Tribe Loui. Gang. I'll see y'all tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow. You know what's crazy? I say that, and then I actually see you tomorrow. It's like,
it's the end. Leave a like and share it to your friends and your kin. When I post a video, I'm gonna need y'all to attend. Thank you for the view, but I ain't done with you. 2023, I'm about to be Jordan with the flu. Yeah, join the tribe. Yeah, join the tribe. I'm gonna need y'all to subscribe.